You've never heard of the Bridgewater Triangle? My boss asked in disbelief. You've been to Taunton and Raynham, so you've basically been there. I sat at my desk and finished filing the overdue report I'd been working on. I shrugged my shoulders and continued typing, but I could tell he wasn't waiting for a response. I didn't want to get into it, not now, because I knew he was going to try and convince me to go exploring. No, I haven't heard of the Bridgewater Triangle, and I don't believe in all that hullabaloo. He raised an inquisitive eyebrow. Are you kidding me? I sighed and turned away from my computer. I believe in ghosts. I believe that our galaxy is infinite and that we'd be stupid to think that we are the only life forms in all existence. I do not believe in Thunderbirds or Sasquatch or whatever else this Bridgewater Triangle is allegedly harbouring. Mason, you can't be that dense. I'm not. I believe in seeing things for myself. I believe in the mythical chupacabra because I'm convinced I saw one near Gooseberry Beach. Why? Because I'd never seen a hairless dog before in my entire 23 years. Look, all I'm saying is to at least make a trip to the Bridgewater Triangle, and I don't mean on Route 44. I mean into the woods, where the sightings were reported. I can almost guarantee that you will change your tone. Go there and come back tomorrow unchanged, and I'll give you a raise. I scoffed. You got a deal, man. The truth is, I was terrified, which came at no surprise. I was a very logical person, but I had a vast number of illogical and irrational fears. Arachnophobia, trypophobia, and I was terrified of going near the ocean because I was convinced a giant kraken would surface and snatch me away. I lived in New Bedford my whole life and never heard of the Bridgewater Triangle, but I have heard some pretty disturbing things about the region. I mean, look at the highway murders right here in New Bedford. The killer was never found, and even though there were 4 suspects, they're all dead now. It's a permanently cold case and we will never know who was responsible. But all this talk about Bridgewater Triangle, a suicidal ghost, Sasquatch or Bigfoot or whatever, Thunderbirds, you'd have a better chance of seeing Christ himself. I decided to humour my boss though, despite my internal protests. After work, I went home to grab a bite to eat, changed my clothes, and I drove up to Hockomock Swamp, where a majority of the sightings have been reported. I called a few of my friends to meet me there, and shortly after I arrived, 2 out of the 5 had made it. The other 3 had some rather piss-poor excuses. I activated the alarm on my black SXT and joined my friends as they began walking into the woods. We must have walked for at least half an hour and literally witnessed nothing but silence. In the distance, we could hear the sounds of cars on the highway and main roads, some birds chirping and squirrels running amok. But that was literally it. We even stood in complete silence and waited for something, anything, to reveal itself, and nothing happened. Mason, Elizabeth laughed. I mean, what did you think was out here? I rolled my eyes. Nothing, Liz. That's my point. I don't see Thunderbirds, and I don't see Bigfoot, and I don't see ghosts. This was a waste of time, but at least I'll have a raise waiting for me tomorrow. I pulled out my iPhone and snapped a selfie with my friends. Then I sent the picture to my boss. We're at Hockomock and there is nothing here. Looking forward to my race tomorrow. Come on, let's get out of here before a spider falls on me. I laughed, watching my friend James lead the way. My phone vibrated and I opened the message response from my boss. "What's that behind you?" "Hold on, guys, hold on," I said, staring at the message with great confusion. "What is it?" Liz asked, somewhat concerned. I read the message again, and again, and again. I read it a sixth time aloud before pulling up the picture I sent my boss. Behind Liz, in the distance, peeking out of a tree, was a tall, pale and gangly figure. It was naked, but had no anatomy. It had a head, 2 unusually long arms and legs, but no face. I stared at the picture and looked around for the tree. It stood there, innocent. There was nothing remotely near it. "Mason, what's wrong?" James asked. "Yeah, you're freaking me out," Liz added. I handed Liz my phone and stared at the tree, literally not blinking once. I watched it with intrigue and fear, because as innocent as that tree looked, I knew it was hiding something. "What the fuck?" Liz exclaimed. "What is that?" Suddenly, a twig snapped. One long arm wrapped around the tree as I stared at it. "Run!" "What?" James asked. "Run!" I screamed, nearly knocking him down. Liz tossed me my phone and I pocketed it as she bolted past me, heading back for the main road where we had pulled over and parked. We had a 30-minute run ahead of us, but we all ran so quickly. We definitely cut the time in half. As a smoker, I had no idea I could run so quickly and for so long without stopping to cough up a lung. There's no drug like adrenaline. We eventually reached a road and stopped to breathe. Liz tied her long, black hair into a ponytail and bent forward, putting her hands on her knees. "Jesus Christ, what the fuck was that?" "I don't know," I stammered. James remained still, staring into the forest. He raised a hand and pointed into the woods. Liz and I walked over to him and glanced in the direction he was pointing and saw that gangly figure watching us from the middle of the clearing. Liz literally jumped over the hood of my car and James's car and into the driver's seat. I was already in the back of my SXT by the time James stumbled into the passenger seat of his Optima, and I followed as Liz did a burnout and sped out of the area and back onto the main road. I had a hard time sleeping that night. I returned to work the next day, not having spoken to anyone about what I'd witnessed. I walked into the office and sat at my desk quietly. A few moments had passed and my boss walked by, dropping a paper on my desk from HR, showing me an hourly rate increase, the raise he had promised. "We won't talk about yesterday," he said, heading to his desk. "The picture you sent me literally said it all." I sat at my desk and allowed a few stress-filled tears to come down my cheeks. I looked out of the office window and saw the familiar profile of that pale, gangly creature from the Bridgewater Triangle, standing in the trees near the office, watching me. What was it waiting for?
I live in the Bridgewater Triangle, Lovecraft County, a roughly 200 square mile chunk of land that's been psychologically cordoned off into an imaginary triangle in the wonky southern part of Massachusetts. It's eerie, foreboding, and filled with little rivulets and swamps, and a mist that rolls in at dawn and stays, refusing to dissipate with the sun, sticking strong and thick. All sorts of creepy happenings are said to take place within the invisible boundaries of the triangle, and I, myself, have heard almost all of them. The ones about the sacrifices and the Satanists, the ghosts and the strange lights, hovering low before disappearing straight into the sky. It's sort of a hobby of mine, collecting these stories. I like watching them change, evolve, and grow. Yes, I've heard almost all of the tales about the Bridgewater Triangle, but there is one I haven't heard before, at least, haven't heard another version of. Mine. Hockomock Swamp. I know, sounds fake, right? A week and a half ago, I decided to camp out there after I was told an incredible tale of an otherworldly being sighted near the center of the swamp. And I wanted to check it out myself, try and capture it with my camera. My source said it had glowing purple eyes and scaly, emerald skin. Granted, my source was an acquaintance from high school, but still, my curiosity got the best of me. And the night started off normal enough. The swamp seemed peaceful, nice even. I had specifically picked a night when the moon was full and bright, giving me light enough to see as I made my way to the center, maneuvering around sinkholes and mud pits. The wind shifted as I neared my destination, and I felt scared, like I was being watched, and I couldn't stop looking behind me, making sure that I was truly alone. It was on the third time I looked behind me I heard it, starting up so slowly at first, and I thought it was the wind, but as it grew louder I realized it wasn't anything natural at all, that it was completely unnatural. A weird buzzing like a crowd of people all talking at the same time, and lower. Underneath the buzzing was a deep, singing sound, chanting maybe. It was odd. Panicked, I looked around me to see that's when I saw a tree, sturdy and tall. I climbed up it and tied myself safe with the rope I had brought along. The noise around me became louder until it crescendoed into a violent crashing sound as I watched from my perch as 3 trees fell in quick succession, 40 or 50 feet to the left of me, like they were being pulled down. I waited. My breath caught somewhere between the nape of my neck and my mouth, hoping that tonight wasn't my last. I saw a weird flash of light where the trees had fallen, blinding me for a moment. I rubbed my eyes and squinted in the darkness, seeing nothing and hearing only the rustling of leaves in the wind. For minutes it went silent, and then I heard something totally recognizable. The sound of footsteps, crunching slowly in the dirt. They got closer and closer, and my heartbeat accelerated until I was sure its sound would give me away. And then I saw it. A monstrosity in black, bulbous eyes shifting along. I screamed. I couldn't help it. It jumped and yelled. Then, in the moment of silence that followed both of our exclamations, we looked at each other, sizing each other up. And then I saw it was just a guy. He was wearing an amazingly dirty black suit and a mask that made him look like a bug, and was carrying a black duffel bag. It jangled when he moved. "Why the hell are you up there?" he called to me. His voice was slightly muffled through the mask. "Why the hell are you walking around Hockomock in the dark, covered in dirt?" He looked down at himself, the mask and shadows obscuring his expression, but he appeared to be thinking. He looked back up, the round tinted glass covering his eyes flickering in the light of the moon. "You know, that's an excellent question," he said, and hiked the bag up to a more comfortable spot on his shoulder. It looked heavy. "Guess that's why they call me Spooky. Well, one of the reasons." "Spooky? Seriously? What are you, like Mulder or something?" "Who?" I gasped audibly, feeling my stomach drop as the weight of it dawned on me. I held the trunk of the tree close and said slowly, "You're, not gonna, like, diddle me or anything, are you?" "What?" he exclaimed, the shock clear and vibrant in his voice. No. He took a deep breath and said in a measured tone, "Why are you even out here alone? Do your parents know you're here?" "It's my grandma, and yeah, she does. She gave me this." I held out my keychain mace. The weight of it in my hand made me feel safer and bold. "So watch yourself." The man hiked the bag back up again and said, "I'm not going to diddle you. God damn." A beat passed between us, and then he added, slightly exasperated, "I'm also wearing a gas mask." "Oh? Yeah. Well," and suddenly cutting me off, The sinister buzzing rose up again, louder and angrier, and then the whooping began, like someone coughing or calling out. It was guttural, heart-piercing sound. "There it is again! What the hell is that?" The man looked back over his shoulder. His voice was urgent. "You should come down, now." I hesitated, looking around me, fear rising with the bile in my throat. I saw movement and looked below. The man had set down his bag and was taking off his gas mask, his face now visible in the moonlight. He spoke to me again, his voice unobscured and low. "You're going to have to trust me and come down." Our eyes met, and I did. I trusted him. I climbed down as the sound boiled around us, filling my ears, rattling around in my head, disorienting me, making me stagger. And then it was gone, and the silence rang out around us, louder than anything I'd ever heard before. Suddenly, my head was clear again and I stood straight. "Why is it always triangles?" I heard him say. "I mean, every sinister, strange, scary place is a blah blah triangle." "No, the triangle is a very occult shape," I said, shaking my head a bit, then pulling my rope from the tree. 3 points, 4 elements, all-encompassing. Makes sense why the paranormal and supernatural would be drawn, or at least associated with it. And then there's all that New World Order nonsense. All-seeing eye, the Freemasons, the chevron, the female form. Shall I continue? He looked at me, slightly impressed. "How old are you, kid?" I looked up at him, eyebrows raised. He sighed, clearly frustrated, and rolled his eyes. 15. I said, laughing, rotating the rope up from my elbow to my hand. Just like Dad taught me before he died. I tied it off and shoved it into my backpack, unceremoniously. "What's that?" he said, pointing to the glowing blue light in my pack. "Oh, it's a handheld gaming device. I'm playing X. I'm at the part where you get to catch one of the legendary birds. I started with Fennekin, so it's Zapdos. A lightning bird. Like, ever heard of a thunderbird?" He nodded. Slowly, his face unreadable. "Yeah, it's kinda like that. Thing, though, you have to follow it around so it doesn't let you catch it easy." My voice trailed off. Sorry, got excited. "Sounds like my kind of game," he said. A loud snap echoed through the small clearing we were standing in. A branch is breaking. He looked behind us, visibly worried, and said, "Come on, let's move." We walked for a good amount of time without hearing anything unusual, but the man kept looking behind us. It seemed like he was trying to keep cool, keep me calm and talking. It worked, and I appreciated that. Otherwise, I would have been scared out of my mind. "So, is your name really spooky?" He laughed, and then he said, No, it's not, and it's just a nickname. Real name's Cooper." "Cooper?" I looked at him questioningly. "Like, D.B. Cooper?" He shook his head. "Dale Cooper?" "Nope," he said. "First name's Cooper, last name's Classified." "Okay, Cooper Classified." He didn't say anything, but I could see him smile slightly in the dim light. "So what exactly are you doing out in the Hockomock, Mr. Classified?" I asked, glancing at him out of the corner of my eye as we walked down the misty path. He was looking behind us again, his brows furrowed, like he was listening intently. "I could ask you the same thing," he said finally. I didn't respond. He sighed. That noise, I'm looking for the source of it, seeing what it is, what it's up to. Research, observation, that sort of thing." "So you're like a real-life Foundation agent, then?" "Foundation?" "It's like this online writing group that writes these fictional horror stories about these scary, weird anomalies, sometimes really dangerous things they contain, protect, and shit, "And shit, huh? I never heard of it. And why would you want to contain and protect all anomalies? That's it. That's asinine. Sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. Gotta terminate at least some of them. Most probably." He looked at me. "Right?" "I don't know. I think it's actually pretty cool." "Yeah, well, that's just your opinion, kid." "So, do you work for some shadowy agency then? A collective? A cabal? Or are you just some crazy Dirk Gently style detective?" "I can neither confirm nor deny any of that." He grinned roguishly, then said, So many damn questions. Anything else you'd like to know? Can I wear your gas mask? He looked down at it, and back at me, and then held it out. Sure, sorry if it's a little sweaty. I slid it on, smiling. Ass. The word I was about to say was knocked out of my mouth in a whoosh of hot air as I felt myself thrown backwards, my back slamming hard against the ground, knocking the mask off. I heard a loud clanging noise and opened my eyes. The man had dropped his bag and was swiftly slinging something across his back. It looked like a large metallic backpack with a long hose attached. He pulled a tiny rectangle from his pocket, flicked it, and suddenly I realized what was going on, what the hell he was doing, and what that light I saw was earlier. A flamethrower? He hit the flamethrower and blasted it outwards. In its light, I saw an enormous black-purple blob. It looked like a globule of water, contained by a thin, slimy membrane. And, oh God, there were so many hands and arms and faces, reaching out, screaming together. As the flame hit it, a thick steam rose up, putrid and sweet at the same time. I flailed out for the mask and slammed it back on my head, trying to suppress the vomit threatening to explode out. The blob screamed and laughed and cried, slowly wobbling away from us, back toward the murky waters of the swamp. And yet, he kept on the flamethrower, burning it, evaporating it, until, with a gut-wrenching pop, it exploded into a geyser of goo that pattered down over the water, mimicking the rat-a-tat-tat of rapid fire. I sat, panting, a few feet from him, my mouth wide open. I closed it slowly and whispered, I just thought of a new nickname for you. Oh yeah? Well, let's hear it then. He was slightly out of breath, and his tattered, scorched jacket flapped loudly in the wind. Super Cooper. He looked at me, expressionless. With the pilot light of the flamethrower flickered, and its glow, I saw him grin. I ran over to my porch, where Grandma stood waiting. Even from her stance, I could tell she was livid. I pulled off the gas mask and walked over to her, head down, shoulders slumped, waiting for the tirade to begin. And it did. Oh, it did. And then, from behind me, I heard a voice. Hello, ma'am. Sorry to interrupt. You're right being worried. I saw your granddaughter here walking on the side of the road. Thought she could use a lift back home. Dangerous times we live in. And who exactly are you? Undercover detective, ma'am. I can't disclose that information, but... He opened his ruined jacket and held out an incredibly accurate copy of a sheriff's badge. Then he snapped it shut. Gotta run, ma'am. Have a good night. Grandma smiled sweetly, cooed a thank you, and waved at him as he walked away. I trailed behind him, watching as he slid the badge back into his jacket pocket and hissed, You know, that's illegal, right? He shrugged, glancing to the left, and said, Kid, my life is illegal. Well, how? I said. That was amazingly dramatic. He looked back at me, smiling. Yeah, it was, wasn't it? I heard Grandma call me and ran back. She pointed to the gas mask I'd left on the porch and had some more words for me. All set? He asked as I approached again. Grandma wants me to tell you look like a young FDR, Jr. I think she meant JFK Jr., but insisted it was FDR Jr., so yeah, there's that. You know, that's not the first time someone's grandma said that. I guess I do look like a junior. He shrugged, put on his helmet, and threw a leg over his motorcycle, sitting down and starting it. Hey, I said, holding out the gas mask. What about this? Keep it. You might need it sometime. He flipped down his visor, revved the engine, and pulled away. Thanks, Super Cooper, I called after him. He threw up a thumb and then waved, and I watched as his image faded into the foggy night and stood listening long after, until the roar of his engine finally died away. I wondered where he was going. 2 days later, I went back to the Hockomock, gas mask and backpack. I got there in the afternoon, so it wasn't quite as scary, but there was still something sinister about the place, like it was hiding some dark, primordial secrets. I heard a bubbling sound, the swamp releasing some gas, nothing more, and kept walking, checking the path behind me every so often, just in case. After a few minutes, I heard another sound, an eerie coughing noise, and then the splashing, like someone was thrashing in the shallow, murky waters around me. I froze. remembering what Mr. Classified had told me before we left the swamp, that I should stay away, or, at the very least, not return at night again. I turned around to leave, and I should have just kept walking, kept my back to it, but I chanced to glance back, and I swear, I saw a flash of emerald and 3 eyes, purple, glowing, staring back at me from the gloomy waters of the swamp. In eastern Utah, trapped in the godforsaken emptiness between Salt Lake City and Denver, there's a stretch of highway known as Jack-o'-lantern Road. It's 24 miles in length and rarely used. It was more popular in the decades past, but now it only provides folks with a very roundabout way to reach Arches National Park. Pretty much the only people who drive on it these days are hopelessly lost. This is the story of the first and only time I drove this stretch of highway, a great many years ago. It's not only a long story, but it's also a true one, and it's taken me a long time to tell. I suppose you've come here to be frightened for a bit, to hear about the things that go bump in the night. And this story ought to do the trick. But when it's over, and you've gone about your day, I hope you bear in mind, reality holds far more terror than any legend ever could. I grew up about 15 minutes north of where the road begins, in a small town called Coal Flats. The name was perfect. Coal production was the only thing keeping us afloat, and the place, unlike much of Utah, was flat as a goddamn pancake. There weren't many kids at my grade school, so everybody talked to everybody. This meant that one kid had a story to tell, and it wasn't long before everyone had heard it. I'm not sure who first brought the tale of Jack-o'-lantern Road to my school, but I do remember who told it to me. Barbara Kingsolver, who last I heard was the widow of some wealthy old rancher up in Heber. Anyway, old Barb and I were friends back then, and I noticed one day that she seemed rather put out. During break time, I asked her what the matter was. "Well," she began, looking around a bit nervously, "I'm just worried about tonight." "Tonight? What's tonight?" Barb pointed at the calendar on the wall of the classroom. "October 29th, and my family is driving on Jack-o'-lantern Road tonight." She clearly expected this revelation to have some effect on me. Myself, I'd never heard of such a road, and had no idea why October 29th was supposed to be such a bad time to drive on it. I'm sure my blank stare gave her all the permission she needed to jump into the story. "Oh, you don't know? Well, I thought everyone knew. Well..." She dove right into her tale. To hear her tell it, back in the 1930s, our very own grade school had an event at an old barn near the side of the road in question. Nobody knew it as Jack-o'-lantern Road in those days. Anyway, this barn, it was all decked out for Halloween festivities. The students were there on a Friday, October 29th, because the holiday happened to fall on a Sunday that year. Children ran around gleefully in their costumes, trading treats and playing games. As was often the case in those days, there weren't enough grown-ups there to watch all of the kids, so nobody noticed when 4 of them wandered right up to the next road, dressed in homemade skeleton costumes and carrying orange jack-o'-lantern buckets to hold all of their candy. Well, of course, these children were struck by a passing vehicle, and each one killed instantly. Years later, I did my research, and found that the dreadful accident had indeed occurred. However, not many of the details of Barb's story had been correct. The accident happened at the end of August, during back-to-school festivities. The driver claimed that the heat waves emanating from the road blurred his vision, and that he didn't see the children until it was too late. According to at least one deputy, the man's breath indicated that there may have been another reason his vision was blurred. I've still no idea how these details work their way into a schoolyard legend, but, according to Barb, every October 29th, these 4 children returned to that road, holding their orange jack-o'-lantern buckets, and seeking revenge on any poor souls who happened to be driving upon it. It wasn't true, of course. But I didn't know that then. Barb's story, and she told it very well indeed, chilled my neck hairs every time I passed the entrance to Jack-o'-lantern Road, even long after my grade school days had passed. There comes a time in a man's life when he is inspired to put away his childish fears, and I suppose this night was one of those times for me. I was 26 years old, and visiting my folks up in Coal Flats. I left their place a little after midnight, and planned to drive through the night to get back home to Phoenix, where I shacked up with a young lady I'd met in school, who later became my wife. She hadn't come with me, though. My folks didn't know about her quite yet. It was near the beginning of this drive that I became aware I would soon pass the entrance of this terrible old road from my youth. God, I hadn't thought about that in years. It wasn't exactly on the way, but it wasn't terribly far from it either. I suppose it was more nostalgia than anything that got me to make that fateful left turn. The first thing I noticed was how bumpy the road was. The other pavements in the area had the occasional dip, it's true, but this road in particular was no fun to drive on. It was clear it hadn't been kept up, and why would it? Local legend or not, nobody drove here anymore. I winced as my Buick lurched along the road, sure the old girl would fall apart at any moment. A brown signpost greeted me, bathed in my headlights. Next gas, 40 miles. I'd just filled up a few minutes before, at the old Main Street station in Coal Flats, so that wouldn't be a problem. There were no other signs on the road, just the occasional rusty mile marker. I'm a bit ashamed to admit, I actually felt cool, conquering my childhood fears like that. It wasn't even October 29th, but still, it was my first time on Jack-o'-lantern Road. I had a beard now, and I wasn't even scared. Yep, grade school me would have thought that was all pretty neat. A shadow lurked in the distance. The old barn, I thought. Those hairs on my neck stood up again. It's not that I was scared, exactly. It's just that I knew what had gone down there all those years ago. I don't know if you've ever been to a place where something horrible happened once, but lots of those places have weird feelings about them. Call it superstitious if you will, but that's the only way I know how to say it. I slowed down as I passed the barn, hoping to get a better look. It was on my right side. I craned my neck and saw it there, perched on its crumbling foundation, abandoned as a building ever was. I should have sped away right then and there. I pulled to the side of the road and stopped the car. There had always been a sort of morbid curiosity about the place, and I wanted to get a closer look. I unlatched the door and took my first and last step onto Jack-o'-lantern Road, gravel crunching underneath my foot. I stood, with one foot in the car and one out, staring intently over the roof and toward the barn, only just illuminated by the brilliance of the Milky Way above. The crickets chirped loudly, and that was the only thing I could hear. I became a little nervous. I was completely alone, or so I thought. Something caught my eye, a flicker, a little glimmer of light, from the left side of the barn. I blinked, thinking I had imagined it. I hadn't. There it was, a faint orange glow. Two of them, in fact. My mind went wild. Jack-o'-lanterns. Any pretense of being cool dropped at that moment. I practically leapt back in my car and slammed the door. Behind me, I closed my eyes and shivered. There was no way I'd seen what I'd thought I'd just seen. Was there? As a matter of fact, I hadn't. There were no jack-o'-lanterns on the road that night. Sure enough, when I peered back out through the passenger side window, they were gone. Chuckled to myself, Jesus man, be cool, be cool. I figured it was just my mind playing tricks on me. It wasn't. What I had actually seen, I learned later, were flashlight beams. I turned the car back on, shaking my head. As I began to pull forward, I flicked my headlights on, and then I slammed the brake, hard. A group of men, perhaps 5 or 6, were standing in front of me in the road, blocking my path. They were dressed in dark clothes, wearing hoods or ski masks. I could see their eyes reflected in my beams. A couple of them held bats. and the one in the back carried something that looked like, at least in the shadows, like a ball and chain flail. They stood about 50 feet in front of me. I heard a pop from far away, and something cracked into the side of my Buick. The gas tank display lit up on my dash. Had someone shot at my car? I screamed like a woman. You better goddamn believe it. I ducked down in case any more shots were fired and reversed hard. After a moment, I spun the car around in a quick 3-point turn and sped in the opposite direction, or at least, I tried to. Another group of men blocked my path, looking every bit as frightening, as menacing as the first group. They walked slowly toward my car. In my rearview mirror, I could see the other men walking towards me as well. I looked out of the window, and I saw 2 or 3 more approaching from the barn. I began to hyperventilate. Was this it? I thought of my girlfriend, sound asleep hundreds of miles away, and I was supposed to be on my way home to her. I began to seriously doubt I would make it anywhere near there. Looking back and forth between the groups of men, I thought wildly that I'd rather take my chances with a bunch of dead school kids. Another shot rang out, and it must have missed the car, but it was enough. I knew I had to move. I'd have to drive into them, but surely they'd planned for that. Surely they had a way to stop me. It seemed too easy, too obvious, and yet it also seemed like my only hope. I reversed again, getting dangerously close to the group behind me. A couple of them, I think, realized what I was up to and started running toward the car. One of them smashed their bat into the back driver's side window when I sprung that Buick to life and aimed it at the men in front of me. More gunshots. The back passenger window collapsed into a shattered heap of glass. My foot pressed so hard on the pedal, I worried it might snap. A couple of the men got out of the way instantly. A couple more stayed for a time, but none of them seemed interested in being flattened by 2 tons of American-made steel. And by that time, I'd reached them, and they were all on the side of the road. I could hear their voices jeering at me through the broken back windows as I sped past, flying down the lonely road from whence I had just come. My car broke down at the end of Jack-o'-lantern Road. Gas had been pouring steadily from the bullet hole in the side, and I'd been doing more than 100 the whole way back. I never drove the old girl again. I hitched a ride from the first car I saw. People were more than trusting in those days. Go figure. And headed straight to the station. The sheriff called in some backup from bigger towns up north, and they went to investigate. But by the time they had gotten there, all the men had cleared out. What remained was an enormous stockpile of the most horrific weapons imaginable, and a whole lot of bodies. There was a woman from Littleton, Colorado, who'd been reported missing just a few days before. In fact, several missing persons cases were solved in that barn. They'd all been mutilated in strange and ritualistic ways, and I was almost one of them. Life is short, I realized, so I ended up introducing my girlfriend to my folks a few weeks later. We've been married 46 years now. We had a couple of kids, and when they were young, I told them scary stories, just like the ones that were told to me. To be honest, I don't see much harm in tales about monsters and ghosts. It's good for the soul to be a bit frightened at times, I reckon, especially when it's all just make-believe. But these days, the only stories that frighten me are the ones on the news of people going missing. Young people with a whole lifetime ahead, cars left abandoned on the side of the road. I don't need much imagination to work out what happened to them. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe some of the legends are pretty bad. But it's tough to know for sure, because real life, well, it can be ever so much worse.